Sir, during the past hours, Hamas was presented with a new proposal regarding ending the war. The proposed deal demands Hamas to hand over all Israeli hostages, whether those still alive or even the dead. The total number of hostages required to be handed over is 48, both alive and dead. This scene opens up an important question. How could Hamas agree to such a step, while in doing so it loses its most important bargaining chip? At this point you might ask me, so what will they get in return? I tell you, the agreement states that Israel will release around 2,500 to 3,000 Palestinian prisoners from its jails. Moreover, the deal includes that Israel stops Gideon's Chariots 2 operation, the military campaign currently sweeping Gaza City. That would mean the invasion of Gaza itself would be cancelled. It looks like a big card, but at its core, is it enough for Hamas? After cancelling the invasion, both parties, Israel and Hamas, are supposed to begin negotiations about the day after the war, meaning what will happen in Gaza once the battles end. But when you look closely, you find the deal in this form incomplete and unconvincing. And that's not a personal opinion, no. It's a clear fact. That's why we need to open the backstage and know how this deal was built and who it came from. Usually deals come through Egypt or Qatar as mediators, but this time the terms did not come from either. The one who carried them to Hamas was a different third mediator, an Israeli activist who had previously participated in the negotiations for the release of Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. That man directly contacted Hamas and conveyed the conditions. Here's the most dangerous point. If Hamas agrees to the deal, US President Trump himself would step in as a personal guarantor that Israel commits to ending the war. This guarantee looks huge, but in reality, it is tied to the continuation of negotiations. Meaning, if anything disrupts the negotiations, Trump withdraws his hand, and Israel becomes free to act however it wants. The deal's terms say that once Hamas hands over all the hostages, Israel will cancel the military invasion, but the army will not withdraw from Gaza, meaning Israeli forces will remain on the ground. And here, naturally, you would ask, so what has changed? As long as soldiers are inside the Strip, the military situation hasn't ended. The answer you'll hear from the American or Israeli side: this is just a first step. After that, negotiations will start on the details of the next day. But if you look deeper, you'll find the second step is more dangerous. Israel will demand Hamas's complete disarmament, expelling its leaders outside Gaza and also disarming the rest of the factions. An almost impossible condition. Could Hamas or any Palestinian faction accept to disarm? Until now, the answer is absolute no. They have completely rejected that, and this is one of the main reasons the war continues. Meaning, Trump's deal practically strips Hamas of all its negotiating cards and then seats them at the table to demand explicit surrender. The logical result: Israel continues its war, Trump lifts his guarantee and says Hamas is the one that disrupted negotiations. Sir, whether you are with Hamas or against it, the matter here isn't emotional. The idea is we need to see the picture from afar. Imagine yourself a European citizen following the scene. You have an armed movement facing an occupying army. The army's main goal is to strip this movement of its bargaining chips, then sit at a formal negotiation table to demand surrender. In plain words, unable to finish it in war, so wants to finish it in negotiations. And this explains why Netanyahu insists on this deal and tries to present it as the final solution. Netanyahu wants to receive Hamas on a silver platter, the hostages return, the Palestinian leadership surrenders itself, and then he does whatever he wants. But Hamas's response was clear: we have no problem negotiating, but we have two main conditions. The first condition, a complete end to the war, meaning not a single bullet sound remains. The second condition, a full withdrawal from the Strip, an actual withdrawal, not a partial one. Hamas also added that it might leave governance to a technocratic government, but disarmament and expelling the leadership, that is completely off the table. And this reveals that the movement is clinging to the military wing as an existential condition, meaning, in their words, they refuse to hand over their weapons, they refuse to leave Gaza, and they also refuse the continued presence of the Israeli army inside the Strip. This insistence stems from the fact that Israel is still unable to force people to flee Gaza southward. The residents are still holding on to their homes despite the bombardment, and this strongly strengthens Hamas's position. Netanyahu himself admitted that he succeeded in displacing only 100,000, and that is a big failure compared to the original plan that aimed to displace hundreds of thousands. From Hamas's point of view, continuing the fight is the only option. If they surrender, they end. If they continue, they still have a chance to preserve their existence. But there's also a sensitive point: their distrust of Trump. Because he previously guaranteed Iran protection in return for negotiations, but afterward Israel struck them, and he also hit them back. So who could take his guarantee seriously? The bigger problem is that the American deal didn't mention Gaza's future at all. Nothing about reconstruction, nothing about people returning to their homes, nothing about canceling displacement plans. And that means the danger goes beyond the idea of hostages. From the beginning, Israel declared that its goal is not just eliminating Hamas, but the deeper goal is displacing the people of the Strip and turning it into settlements. So if Hamas agreed and handed over the hostages, Israel would afterward increase the pressure, disarmament, expelling leaders, and then civilians would remain without protection. At that point, Israel would squeeze them with hunger, siege, and bombardment until they are displaced. The question here is, who will guarantee the civilians? Not just Hamas that needs guarantees, but the entire people need guarantees. The hostages are not just a bargaining chip in Hamas's hands alone. They are the last pressure card for the entire Palestinian people. If the hostages were released without return and guarantees, Israel would no longer have a motive to negotiate. America also wouldn't pressure. Then either Hamas surrenders and loses everything, or it refuses and appears before the world as if it is the one blocking peace. But does this mean refusing negotiations completely? Of course not. Negotiations are necessary, but they must come with real guarantees, complete end to the war, residents returning to their homes, reconstruction, and clear binding international guarantees. Just like Ukraine today refuses to end its war without guarantees over its land, despite what is happening to it. History confirms that states which surrendered without guarantees vanished. The Ottoman Empire was divided, Germany was split into East and West, and Iran itself, when it trusted Trump's guarantees, was deceived. Therefore today, any deal to hand over all hostages without guarantees means a bigger loss tomorrow. And here, an alternative question arises. If Hamas carried out the conditions completely, disarmament, leaders leaving, full withdrawal, would Israel be satisfied? Experience says no, because Israel could open new demands, tunnel maps, or handing over hidden fighters or any other pretext. And then the war continues even after surrender. What makes matters worse is that Netanyahu's demands are not fixed, but increase with time. At first he said he wanted Hamas's disarmament. Then he had 5 goals: disarming Hamas, freeing all Israeli prisoners, disarming the rest of Gaza's factions, imposing Israeli military control over the Strip, and appointing an alternative government not belonging to either Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. The American nominee to lead Gaza after the war is Samir Hlele, whose story we mentioned earlier. And this is a very sensitive point, because it reveals that the plan is not just about ending a war, but about completely rearranging Gaza to fit Israeli and American measurements. In other words, Netanyahu is not seeking a peace deal, he is looking for a full surrender plan and political restructuring. Now you might ask me, so if the first solution, releasing all hostages without guarantees, didn't work, and the second solution, Hamas's disarmament, also didn't work, are there alternative solutions? I tell you yes, there is a third solution, which is the Egyptian deal that was proposed before, and it was clearer than any American proposal. The Egyptian deal was built on 3 main stages. The first stage, a ceasefire for 60 days. During that period, Hamas releases part of the living hostages, along with 18 bodies of the dead. At the same time, humanitarian aid enters the Strip in quantities sufficient for everyone, under the supervision of the United Nations and the Red Crescent. Then negotiations begin about the day after the war. The second stage, extending the 60-day truce so negotiations continue, and during that period a larger number of hostages are released. The third stage, releasing all the remaining hostages alive and dead. After that, reconstruction begins with the Israeli army's withdrawal. So simply, the Egyptian deal provides clear guarantees, ceasefire, aid entry, gradual negotiations, and in the end, reconstruction. But Israel rejected it. Why? Because it forces it into real commitments and gives Hamas bargaining chips. And that's exactly what Israel does not want, to be bound before the world by clear conditions. The irony appeared when Trump himself presented a deal very similar to the Egyptian one. Same idea of a 60-day truce, same idea of phased releases, and same idea of aid. The only difference was in minor details, but the core was the same, meaning America reintroduced the Egyptian recipe but wrapped with an American brand name. Details of Trump's deal. On the first day of the truce, 2 things happen. Negotiations begin via mediators America, Egypt, Qatar, and Hamas releases 8 living hostages. On the 7th day, it releases 5 bodies. On the 30th day, more bodies. On the 50th day, 2 alive. On the 60th day, 8 bodies. A total of 28 hostages, leaving the rest in Hamas's hand as a pressure card. As for aid, the deal says 600 shipments daily, 50 of them fuel for hospitals and bakeries, and 300 go to the north. Who distributes them? Hamas insisted it must be the United Nations and the Red Crescent, not suspicious institutions, and America agreed. Regarding military activity, Israeli airstrikes stop 10 hours daily, and on days of hostage releases, it increases to 12 hours. But despite this air truce, ground forces remain until the end of negotiations, meaning practically Trump's deal is a carbon copy of the Egyptian deal, but wrapped under an American name. And that's what made Netanyahu rush to Washington to pressure Trump. He told him, "You're forcing me to implement the Egyptian deal that I already rejected." And indeed, after a period of intense pressure, Trump backtracked on his terms. He announced clearly, either Hamas hands over all the hostages at once, or it faces the wrath of America and Israel, meaning practically he returned to the same starting point, and that was a major blow to any hope of a real truce or middle ground. The meaning here, sir, is that the war is still ongoing. Israel is still unable to fully control Gaza. Civilians are still holding on to their homes despite day and night bombardment. And Netanyahu, to escape the pressure of protests, protests that for the first time are flooding Israeli streets with hundreds of thousands, tries to throw the ball into Hamas's court. For the first time in Israel's history, we see million-strong protests against a prime minister. The hostages' families themselves are the ones taking to the streets demanding a deal to end the war in exchange for the return of their children. The stance flipped against the government. So Netanyahu made a calculated move. He said he was willing to end the war, but only if Hamas hands over all the hostages at once. But in reality, he knows this is an impossible demand, rejected by Hamas. The real goal is not to end the war, but to clear himself in front of his people, and to show the world that the problem lies with Hamas. Meaning he paints a picture that he wants peace, but the other side is obstructing it. A clear political game, but a dangerous one. Netanyahu sets impossible conditions to achieve 3 goals at once. 1, appear as if Hamas is the only obstacle to peace. 2, clear himself before his people, who blame him daily. 3, prolong the war until he achieves his broader dream, displacing Palestinians from Gaza, full control over the West Bank, and expansion northward. And with that, he writes his name in Israeli history books as the first prime minister to approach the idea of Greater Israel. But we must note an important point. In the past, Hamas and its allies had the luxury of choice. They had support from Iran, Hezbollah was strong, and Bashar al-Assad was holding on. At that time, the ceiling of ambition was higher. Now the scene is completely different. Iran got entangled and suffered heavy blows, Hezbollah weakened, Bashar lost control, and major leaders like Hassan Nasrallah or Ismail Haniyeh were eliminated. The result is that Hamas became alone. Israel and the Americans succeeded in striking Iranian nuclear reactors and moved the battle into the heart of Gaza. The balance of power shifted. Hamas lost the element of surprise. Even the card of prolonging the war, which once worked against Israel, today serves Israel itself. The length of the war has now become a means to starve and thirst the people. And here, Hamas found itself needing the end of the war more than Israel. From here, Hamas's leadership began looking for negotiations, but too late. Negotiating while having lost its cards, while Israel controls the ground. The real danger now is that Israel wants everything without guarantees. Hostages released with no guarantees, disarmament with no guarantees, withdrawal with no guarantees. And this is the most dangerous equation. The conclusion, sir, the offer deal is not just written clauses. It is a test of a people's will. The hostages are not just a negotiating issue for Hamas, but the last card for the entire people. And what is required is not refusing negotiations, but negotiations with real guarantees, complete end to the war, actual withdrawal of the army, reconstruction and the return of the residents. Otherwise, any deal will be just a cover for a gradual surrender ending in total displacement.